Yes, let's talk about the TikTok ban. Why not? It's been an issue that has been floating around for quite some time, but yesterday the US House of Representatives passed a law that kind of gave it the ability to ban TikTok. It's not like just a sudden ban on TikTok entirely. The idea is that they will give TikTok the opportunity to be sold to a US-owned entity of some description, a US owner. The kind of specific wording of this news report here is that it is specifically to divest the US portion of things. Because my sort of understanding is that TikTok isn't used in China. That it is already under some kind of restrictions, if not a ban, which kind of fits into other similar kind of restrictions on using social media in China, which I think does place additional skepticism upon it. I've often seen this sort of fact that, you know, it's kind of prescribing something else for the rest of the world than China is happy for its own young people and citizens to use, maybe suggests something untoward, or you can at least read that into it. And, you know, you can sort of maybe understand that suspicion. It's the Mortons making a really good point here. So, like, who do I trust more with my data? America or China? It's a really hard decision. It often is that the criticisms that are being thrown at China are often, and this isn't me doing big pro-China speech here, but it is often similar practices that the US and Europe has engaged in themselves, right? We basically discovered that the National Security Agency in the US had pretty free and easy wheeling access to Facebook and to other sort of social media and internet services. It says here in this Mother Jones article, Facebook along with Google and Microsoft had all sort of collaborated with this PRISM project. This was a massive news story revealing the extent to which the National Security Agency in the US were monitoring people's communications online, phone tapping, etc. And again was one of those news stories that just not suddenly, but over time kind of faded. In the same way that the Panama Papers, which revealed the extent to which wealthy people in multiple countries were using offshore banks, often in the British Virgin Islands or elsewhere in the world, in countries where there is A, very little in the way of tax to pay, B, very little in the way of oversight for company accounting, and C, the ability for foreign companies, foreign residents to set up companies within those countries. And again, these felt like massive revelations at the time, things that should have been earth-shattering, and yet nevertheless they sort of faded. Because I guess these are things where it wasn't in the interests of anyone in power to really do anything about it. It does make you question that kind of liberal ideal of the ability of journalism, of sort of the public sphere more broadly, to change the world. We have this conception of the public sphere, whether that be journalism, established news outlets, whether that be social media, whether that be the ability to go out in the public square and just kind of do a little speech to people, you know, Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. When we talk about this idea of a public sphere, about this idea of freedom of speech, etc., we do so with the idea that what we say matters, that having this ability to talk about the issues of the day, to debate these things, to have media institutions that can at times hold power to account by investigating things. We kind of have this feeling, right, that that's going to change something, right? That the reason we think that freedom of speech matters is because we think that the things that we say or the things that other people say will have a material impact on the world around us. And yet so often we find that there are so many further steps to that. Actually, just revealing the big scandal or revealing the big cover-up, you're still relying on someone else with a degree of power having enough to gain that they will act upon that. I think the extent to which this has been a bipartisan push has been really interesting as well. And this is true not only of the TikTok ban, but other aspects of these US-China tensions. When Donald Trump first started imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, and he started with washing machines and with putting a tariff on them. So for anyone that doesn't know, a trade tariff is when you essentially impose a kind of extra tax on goods imported from another country. So if you had 2 washing machines and the one from China was $80, which would be a very cheap washing machine. Probably don't go and buy a washing machine for $80. I think you'd have to buy a new one very soon. Then the American one was $100. If the US government imposed a tariff, they might say, okay, we're going to add $40 to the cost of every single washing machine, which would make the Chinese washing machine as expensive or more expensive than the US counterpart, which doesn't have that additional uplift of the tariff on it. And the idea is to kind of encourage people to buy homegrown washing machines rather than those being imported from another country. And when Donald Trump first started imposing tariffs on a kind of basket of Chinese goods back in 2018, a lot of this was seen as really either bizarre or kind of this sort of bad protectionism that he was doing. This was the kind of economic part of his American firstism as being a bit silly and very outdated. Like for many, many years, the go-to theory of economists and liberal politicians has been that we need to have as much free trade as possible throughout the world. And so the idea of introducing tariffs was seen as a bit old-fashioned and bad. But over time, what's happened, and actually as this report's saying, one of the concerns was that not only with washing machines, but with various other goods that Trump had imposed tariffs on, that actually all it had done had pushed prices up for American companies and American consumers. There's actually a lot of goods that go back and forth between the US and China. So there were some American manufacturers that were trying to buy in parts for things that they were then going to assemble in the US, and costs went up for them as well. And one of the interesting things has been how over the past few years, that's become really normalized. In fact, Joe Biden not only didn't repeal a bunch of Donald Trump's tariffs that he imposed, but has added a whole bunch of his own, particularly around silicon chips. The chips that are said to have been, that it is presumed are going to be a really big part of particularly the AI revolution, but tech more broadly. So it's been really interesting to see that trajectory from when Donald Trump first started imposing tariffs on China, where it was broadly seen as this kind of weird, outdated thing to be doing, to now where there is just such bipartisan support in the US for these kind of broad anti-China actions. It's a slightly worrying place to be, I would say.